any further retaliatory attacks that Israel does might well be focused on those bases that are developing the Iranian nuclear capability. It's well known that the Americans are looking at this very, very closely indeed. And I think ultimately it is absolutely in the world's interest that Iran does not get a nuclear capability. And they may be a year or two off it, but that is the thing that could really spark this further. Well, it's apparent from what we've seen over the last couple of days that when it comes to Israel's defensive capabilities, they are hugely significant. And when it comes to Iran's offensive capabilities, its missiles and drones, they seem to be of potentially a different era to what Israel's doing. Although the Shahid drones we've seen extensively used by the Russians in Ukraine, they have not been terribly effective there, and certainly in the attack against Israel. So although the Iranian military is very large and very capable in technical sophistication, it is probably some way behind the Israelis. It's very difficult to compare sort of like for like. Iran is a massive country in area terms, whereas Israel is fairly small. However, the Israeli military has really been fighting for the last 50 years. It is very experienced. Technically, they have some of the latest military capability. And as a defensive army, in other words, defending Israel, they are hugely effective. So it is, from what we've seen at the moment, the long-range strike capabilities, Israel probably has the advantage, and not only because of its modern aircraft and missiles, but also because the air defense systems that the Iranians have are not as effective and comprehensive. So although Israel is a far smaller country, militarily, it probably has the advantage. And it has another very significant advantage in the fact that Israel does have nuclear weapons and Iran at the moment does not. I've just been thinking about it today and thinking what Zelensky has said, I think yesterday. If the US and the Allies can knock down all these Iranian drones and missiles, why aren't they doing the same in Iran, in Ukraine? Because in effect, the Brits and the Americans are preventing Iranian missiles killing civilians in Israel. Well, actually, the same premise, we could do the same to stop Russian missiles killing civilians in Ukraine. Because what this has shown is that a lot of those missiles have been taken out, hundreds of miles away from Israel, almost in international airspace. And one could see a scenario that, NATO countries could take out a lot of Russian missiles and drones in the Black Sea, preventing casualties in Ukraine. So I think it's opened a debate that should be had. Whether Iran was using up old stockpile in its attack on Israel, I'm not sure I get that. Their Shahid drones are as the most modern sort of drones and attack drones that they've got, and we've seen a lot of them around the place. Their missiles, and from what I understand, quite a few of the missiles actually failed to fire and never really left the ground. I think Iran is some way behind the US, the British, and probably the Russians in this, although no doubt Russia is helping them. I think the other thing to focus on is that Iran, for its military projection, uses a lot of these proxies, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen. It also deploys its proxies to places like Syria and Iraq. So that is the comprehensiveness of the Iranian sort of military. The sophistication is some way behind the US and others. And no, I don't think that they're just using the cannon fodder, if you like, to use up US and British missiles. I think they're probably an awful lot more in the stockpile. So that might be a convenient answer. What we have seen coming out of Tehran is an awful lot of fake news and propaganda. And I think this is probably part of it. Well, whether this conflict spills over into a wider war in the Middle East and perhaps beyond, yeah, we are certainly on a knife edge at the moment, and it'll be determined, I expect, with what the Israelis do next. It would appear that the Iranians, the government in Tehran, seem to be satisfied by their retaliation for the killing of some of their senior generals in Syria, and it goes to see whether Israel will also be satisfied. I think it's key that the Americans, who the Israelis rely on for so much of their military hardware and financial support, the Americans have told the Israelis that they should take this as a win and hold it there and draw a line under it. And also other allies like the British are doing the same. So if Israel takes that, then I don't think at this stage there'll be any escalation. If Israel does attack Iran in a significant fashion, which it could do, it could bring in other players as well to this scenario. It could also up the support to its terrorist organizations like Hamas and the Houthis, which could bring in a wider conflict. But I think, so it is on a balance. I think that there is also an opportunity that things could de-escalate if Iran could be persuaded to stop supporting terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, then that will take a lot of pressure out of the situation and hopefully would allow an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, which would take further heat out. So it's in the balance. It could go either way. Let's hope it will go down the de-escalatory route rather than escalatory. But I expect it's all in the hands of the Israeli government over the next few days and months. Well, I think it's possible. There are a lot of moving parts in all of this. Obviously, what concerns me slightly is President Putin and the Russians. They, as far as they're concerned, they would like to see the war escalate in the Middle East to take the world's sight off what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And at the moment, that's exactly what's happening. Everybody is looking at Israel and Iran. Nobody's looking at Ukraine and Russia. But there are opportunities. The Iranian government, we know, in a difficult position. Iran is not a rich country. They are struggling. So, although maybe some of the Ayatollahs in Iran would like to go to war, it would appear the vast majority of the population in Iran absolutely does not. It's clear that the Americans are trying to de-escalate. So I think that there is a possibility. But it's probably actions coming out of the Kremlin from the Russians. It'll be actions coming out of Tel Aviv and the Israeli government that will really determine whether we can de-escalate or whether this develops into a wider conflict. Well, the state of Iran's nuclear capability, I think, is absolutely fundamental and key to this. Iran with nuclear weapons is a really dangerous country. It's dangerous as it is at the moment, but if it had nuclear weapons, and the whole idea of nuclear weapons is what we call mutually assured destruction, that as the main players in the world, the Americans and the Russians and the Chinese have them, they know that they would destroy each other, which is why it's kept the peace for 75 years. To have a tyrannical regime like Iran with nuclear weapons, I think would completely upset the balance. We know that the Iranians have been enriching uranium, and basically they need to have enough uranium that's enriched to plus of 90% in order that they can create their nuclear warheads for the missiles that we know they have. At the moment, they have not done that. They are not in that position, and it will take them probably a year or so to do it. But we've seen what's happened in North Korea, and North Korea are at a similar position, but probably don't have the capability and the missiles that Iran does. So that is one of the concerns, and I think any escalation or any further retaliatory attacks that Israel does might well be focused on those bases that are developing the Iranian nuclear capability. It's well known that the Americans are looking at this very, very closely indeed. And I think ultimately it is absolutely in the world's interest that Iran does not get a nuclear capability. And they may be a year or two off it, but that is the thing that could really spark this further. So part of the negotiations, no doubt, with the Americans and others, the quid pro quo will be that they shouldn't do it. We know that there are quite a lot of Western countries who owe Iran a lot of money, and that might be part of the deal. So, that's why things are on a knife edge at the moment. But the last thing the world needs is a nuclear Iran. Well, whether Iran's managed to progress further in its nuclear capability, or potentially also chemical and biological, without the West knowing about it, I think that is probably unlikely. Not that the CIA or MI6 or anybody else would go public or admit to it. I think because Iran has been such a focus for our intelligence gathering, for a number of years, the last 50, 60 years or so, and particularly since the mid-70s when it became the Islamic Republic, I expect the knowledge of those areas is pretty significant. So when we hear that they've enriched uranium to about 80%, I'm pretty certain that's probably true. When we had an idea of the state of their chemical weapons program, I think that is pretty much true. So I think it would be unlikely that the Iranians are further ahead than we think at the moment. So I still think we've got a bit of time on our side to make sure that they don't develop weapons of mass destruction. Do I agree? Do I think that there is a possibility that tactical nuclear weapons could be used? Tactical nuclear weapons or battlefield nuclear weapons, which are still massive explosions, but not quite like the sort of city-ending intercontinental ballistic missiles. I actually don't think it's likely. I think the nuclear issue has really, I think what we've seen in Ukraine with the Russians threatening nuclear attack almost since day one when they invaded on the 24th of February 2022 has actually exposed the nuclear conundrum as a bit of a myth, because the view that you can use a small nuclear weapon and get away with it, I think it's people who are saying this is likely, I don't think really understand exactly what these weapons are. A battlefield nuclear weapon that the Russians have is about 10 kilotons. I live in Salisbury, a town of about 40,000 people. That would flatten that town and kill everybody in it. So it's not just a big explosion. It's a lot more than that. So I do not think, the way things stand at the moment, that it is likely that we would see a tactical nuclear weapon used. Now, there is, people are saying because the Israelis have nuclear weapons, they might use them against Iran. I don't think that's the case. I think it would be counterproductive. If Putin could have used nuclear weapons without creating a nuclear response, he would have done it. He would have got so much further. So, no, I think the way that the nuclear balance across the world is at the moment is just about right. It is really creating an environment where they cannot be used, which is why it's so important that people like Iran and North Korea are not allowed to get nuclear weapons, because I think that would unbalance it. And I would caveat my answer, if Iran and North Korea got nuclear weapons, then I could see the potential for their use in the next few years.